Welcome, everyone. This is your host, Adam Coleman. And with me today, we have Regina Hess. She's been in the financial services field for over 25 years now. She's a certified financial planner, a certified divorce financial analyst, and the founder and president of Forge Wealth Management. So today we're going to go through and talk a little bit more about her CDFA designation and really all things divorce financial planning. So Regina, thanks for being here.
Thanks so much for having me, Adam. I'm really honored to be here today.
It's my pleasure. So before we begin, tell us a little bit about yourself and what made you decide to go into financial planning in the first place.
Oh, goodness, that's a long story. But I have been, like you said, over 25 years in the field. I actually started my career as a nurse in cardiac critical care. And I had a friend who was trying to teach me the stock market and basically created a monster. So then I went back and took classes, and the more classes I took, the more interested I became. And then I made a career switch a long time ago. So I tell people that I used to take care of their physical health, and now I take care of their financial health. And I love the planning aspect of it because it's like figuring out where they are, where they want to be, and how to help them get there. It's like putting a big jigsaw puzzle together.
What made you go more into the divorce planning side of things?
Yeah, that's a great question. I had my CFP first, and I was doing financial planning for my clients. And I had a couple clients get a divorce, and they came to me and said, "Can you help us with this?" I'm like, "Well, sure. I have my CFP. I can help you with that." And then I started trying to help them, and I realized it wasn't working right. Like my financial planning process did not work for my clients who were going through a divorce, and I was just like, well, why isn't this working? So I basically started doing research like, well, how can I help them if this process isn't working? How can I help them? And then I found out about the Institute for Divorce Financial Analysts and that they offered the CDFA training. So I was like, well, I guess I have to take it. And that was many years ago. So I've had the CDFA designation for quite some years. And the funny thing is, once I got it, for many years, I only used it for clients who were already clients and they were going through something. And I was just like, oh, this is probably not something I should let a lot of people know. But yeah, you get that whole guilt thing, like you're creating the divorce, right? Like I had nothing to do with the divorce. I'm just helping you. But for many years, that's what I did. And then I went to a firm that did not allow me to target that kind of practice. And so when I started my own firm in 2015, I decided, you know what, this is an area that I really do believe I can help people in. And so I started leaning into it a little bit more because people were finding me anyway. So I just started leaning into it. And now I am very much involved in the divorce side of planning.
And one thing we've talked about on this show a few times in the past, I've had a lot of CDFAs on here before, is there's very different roles that they've played. So some are exclusively divorce planning. They don't really do any kind of wealth management or real financial planning afterwards. You have some that are hybrids where they do it during the divorce and then also work with them afterwards. And then some just really only do the wealth management side, maybe dabble into the divorce side just to have the designation to help out.
Mm.
Kind of where do you fit in with that? It sounds like you're more hybrid where you do both. You handle divorce specific financial planning and then also obviously non-divorce cases, you help with them on the wealth management side too, correct?
Oh, yeah, yeah, definitely. And there's a really odd statistic about the number of CDFAs out there that are not actually actively using that designation, which makes me sad because there's so many people who need help. But yeah, I have clients who are not divorced and they're married or single or widowed even, and they need my traditional financial planning aspect. And then I have my clients who are single as a result of the divorce or in the process of divorce, and they need that separate type of planning. So I do a little bit of both.
Perfect. Yeah, and I want people to understand that you don't have to have a financial planner handling their money to get help on the divorce side. I think that's a misconception that people have. It's like, oh, I need to talk to my financial planner. Maybe they'll help me through this. They may be a CDFA, which is ideal in this case, but they may not practice the CDFA work, like you said. Sometimes it's very important to have somebody very specific into the divorce financial planning world, even if they're a separate financial advisor. You can help with the divorce planning work, even if you're not ultimately the one that's going to manage their money. They can have a financial advisor and still get you involved on the divorce planning side, correct?
Oh yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And I've done that for several people before. And honestly, when someone comes to me, I'm focused on how can I help them through that divorce. It's not about like, oh, well, can we continue to be clients later? I mean, if that happens, that's great, but that's not a prerequisite. And there's so much help that they need through that divorce that they're not even thinking about stuff like that. And if you put that out to them, that's just the wrong approach. And I'll also say that being the CDFA for as long as I've been a CDFA and how I've become more and more active each year, I do webinars with another group of divorce professionals and we do 1 to 2 a month. And I will tell you, I still learn something every single time we do those webinars. So no one's perfect but there's always room for growth. But I agree with you that somebody who's not utilizing their CDFA regularly, they're going to be a little rusty and they're not going to have all those tools sharpened that they're going to need to help you. But I'm constantly sharpening my tools and still realizing, wow, there's so much more to learn. And then just having a community, like prior to us recording, I asked you about a client going through her divorce. They're working on the alimony right now, but she needs a house. So she needs a mortgage. And so I was confirming with you, hey, here are the parameters that she's going to need before she even can apply for the mortgage. So trusting your other divorce professionals and having those open dialogues is really important as well.
And that's a great segue. I was going to ask more about different divorce team members. A lot of people focus solely on the attorney side, which obviously they're very important. But what other team members do you typically run across as vital people to that divorce team?
Yeah, well, obviously, the divorce attorneys are a big piece of that. Divorce mediators do a lot with mediation. That tends to be the bulk of my work. And that's a good approach for a lot of people because it's usually less volatile in many ways. And then there's also collaborative. I've done a few collaborative cases as well. And then, so besides that, there are divorce coaches. Not everyone knows about divorce coaching, but I work with a divorce coach who is amazing. And she says she's basically the wedding planner for your divorce, which is really comical. But she really does. She helps get the people ready for the divorce, ready to meet with you, ready to meet with the attorney or the mediator, things like that. Obviously, there's therapists. When anyone going through divorce, it's going to be much less expensive to go to your therapist than to do that with your attorney. And the therapist has the skills to help you move through those issues. And then another person would be the parenting coach. I mean, kids are impacted by a divorce, whether or not we realize it, to what length or depth impacted, they really are impacted. And they're not just impacted at the little kid stage. They could be in college or they could be adults. As we see a lot of great divorce, they're still impacted. So, we work with a parenting coach as well. And obviously someone like yourself is really important to the process because at least one of those parties has to get a new house or a rental situation. And it's a really difficult conversation right now with the housing environment. There's not as many houses to choose from. And then, of course, interest rates being higher than we're used to.
Right. And especially for the people trying to retain the house, there's a lot of nuances that go into it. If they're forced to refinance, that changes
Mhm.
their budgeting, what they're able to actually afford. A lot of people have this misconception that they just are going to get to keep the house and maybe assume the existing mortgage, and it's not that easy in most cases. So it's important to have that conversation and almost treat it like you're buying the house again and figure out, is this something you can afford? Is this something that you're going to
Right.
be comfortable with before you get the attorneys involved, just because you don't want to fight or negotiate for something that really, from a financial standpoint, you're not going to be able to afford anyway. And I like the suggestion of the therapist. I think that's a great suggestion. The divorce coach is one that I don't think nearly enough people utilize, and they can certainly get you in touch with so many other people and strong divorce team members, as opposed to trying to just go through the attorney and have them trying to handle it at whatever hourly rate they're going to charge to try to figure all this stuff out. So
Not
yeah,
a
a lot
good
of people
plan.
think that no, a lot of people think that having the multiple team members is going to make it more expensive, but like I've said before, it typically makes things cheaper and much smoother along the way if you have the right people involved, like yourself, like a therapist, like a divorce coach, before the attorney gets too heavily involved as well.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. The other thing that you mentioned about, seeing if you can afford the house, which is something really important to do before the divorce is finalized. You have to talk to someone like yourself way ahead of time because of the parameters are different, right? For lending. But another thing to do, especially if somebody's, refinancing or staying in the house, what we found helpful is to have it appraised and see where the problems are. In Pennsylvania, we had problems with stucco. And that could be $100,000 fix on the house. So if you were going to buy a house, you would get an appraisal. So if you're going to stay in a house and you've been in that house for 10 years, you don't really know where all the problem childs are because you're kind of just going through your day to day. So that's another really good avenue for people to check out if they're keeping the home.
An inspection, like a full-blown home
Full
inspection.
blown,
I
full
see so
blown.
many people don't do that. They'll get the appraisal, which is step one. I think that's good because you need to know the value, and that's important. But I will say real estate appraisals are not set up as inspections. They don't go
Right.
through nearly enough detail to figure out if there's major issues with the roof or the HVAC system or plumbing or any of that
Yeah.
stuff that could be like major big ticket items that you just don't know what you're getting into. And people think, oh, I've lived in this house for so long. I know what's wrong with it. I know what works. And it's just not the same thing. So almost treat it just like you're buying a house and just go through that process and figure out, is this really a house that you want to buy and live in and stay in before you get too down that path of the emotional side of wanting to stay in this house just for the sake of being there. It might not be
Yeah.
the best financial decision or emotional decision in the long run as well.
Right. And you could bring it back to the negotiation table. Well, the value really is this much less because we have to fix this. Right. So it's a good thing for people to think about.
Yeah, absolutely. What order and sequence do you ideally see as when people should get involved? Do you think that they should be reaching out to therapists first, then a divorce coach, or attorney first, or you first? What's kind of the sequence that you see?
I would say I see a little bit of everything, to be honest with you, because sometimes it's the divorce attorney or the mediator that brings me in, refers me into the case, depending on what their needs are. But if somebody comes to me, usually my first referral is to the divorce coach that I like to work with. And then, depending on their situation, we're going to lean into mediation if we can. If we can't, then we have great divorce attorneys that we'd like to use too. So, those would be my firsts, and then the therapist is very quickly after that, and the parenting coach as we get closer to before you tell your kids, have the joint conversation, maybe meet with the parenting coach to talk it through and make sure you have a united front on how the presentation is going to go to the kids.
Absolutely. Yeah, and you mentioned collaborative, so I wanted to get your take on all of that. So obviously different types of divorce. A lot of people think of the litigation side as kind of the standard mediation they somewhat
Yeah.
understand as well, but maybe speak to the collaborative side and any other types of divorce that people can consider when they're going through this process.
Yeah, collaborative is growing in popularity. So a mediator, as we all know, a mediator is a neutral party, right? Whereas the attorneys are like, I'm taking this side and I'm taking that side. A collaborative divorce is everyone involved in the case is neutral. So they're all Switzerland. So I have an attorney, he has an attorney. They're their own attorneys and they're getting their own advice. But when they come to the table, everyone has to come to the table with the mindset that we're trying to agree and be kind to each other, but also find a fair, equitable agreement. I've worked through a couple of collaborative cases, and one of my favorite, I know this sounds weird, one of my favorite cases was a collaborative case. Both spouses were extremely kind to each other, almost to the point where I'm like, why are they getting divorced? They're so good. But they're obviously they needed to go through a divorce process. But with everything they were doing, they were checking in with each other. They were, how does that work for you? And how does that impact you? And how does that impact me? And so they talked through the whole thing so that there was like no negativity through that, which is very odd for a divorce. Yeah, even when you're in mediation, there's some kind of negativity because it's a life change and it's not a fun life change. But the collaborative process, I think, helps take some of that away, and it also puts both of them a little bit more in the driver's seat, both of the spouses. But the one thing is, you do have to be careful with anyone coming in potentially to sabotage. I'm not saying anybody would, but occasionally, if something doesn't work out, you have to start all over, and neither one of you can use any of those divorce professionals at all going forward. You sign off that you agree to that in the beginning, so that you get to the ninth leg and then it blows up on you. Then what do you do? So that's the only negative there I see, but it's a very good process. They're collaboratively trained as well. So I am a CDFA, right? So I can help with the financial aspects of breaking up the divorce. I am also mediation trained, but I don't practice mediation, but it helps inform me when I'm working in a mediation case or a collaborative case. And now, because I'm getting a little bit further into collaborative, I'm also going to go take collaborative classes so that I could officially be a collaborative case. The collaborative cases that I was brought into, the one evolved that way, and another one, more recent one, I was brought in as an advocate outside the collaboration, but still part of it. It was a little bit different, but it's a great option for people for sure. I think you also have arbitration as an option, but I don't like that at all because it's basically going to the court and having a complete stranger make your decisions for you. And that's not me. I'm a control freak, not liking that at all.
I don't think anything great comes from that. So I
No.
think most people agree that that and litigation are not the ways to go, but it still becomes the norm in people's minds. So the more we
Yeah.
can get the information out that there are better options or potentially much cheaper options and less stressful options available, I think the better. So
Yeah.
any other advice that you would give for somebody starting down that path, considering a divorce?
Okay, so much advice. For the financial side, just start collecting your information. I'm all about organizing your information, getting piles of it, and or on your computer, creating a file in on your computer somewhere. Just collect information, and then obviously reach out to a professional like a divorce coach or a CDFA like myself before you go down the path of going straight to an attorney. Your case might need an attorney or it might work out as a mediation. We talk through it, we can kind of help guide you. And then there's also the case of helping you select an attorney that is mediation mindset. So there's a difference there too. But I would say starting that way. And I would also try to avoid taking advice from friends because friends may have great intentions, but the traditional method is lawyer up, and that may not be the right way to go. But there's also things that if you do them in the beginning can save you a lot of time and energy later and money.
Yeah, and I think that's the big one that I wanted to stress on is that's the big downside of lawyering up is people have that mindset of, oh, this is going to help me save more money by doing it that way. But the
Yeah.
exact opposite usually works out to be the case, just because then you're having to pay lawyer fees for months, if not years, to go through that
Right.
process. So any final thoughts, I guess, before we leave, anything else you wanted to run through on this?
No, divorce is a tough topic. It's a life transition. There's a couple other life transitions, but I think this is one of the hardest that and becoming a widow or widower. Those are two of the hardest life transitions. Form a support group. There are groups out there that are specifically for people going through a divorce. So that could be a great spot to help get you ready and have no other people going through it because there's still, sadly, there's still a social stigma around it. So we got to help people go through that because you also have to sadly you lose friends on that too. So it's a tough situation. So finding a social group that could help you through that as well.
I think it's great advice. Well, no, this has been a pleasure. I really appreciate you taking the time. So, if somebody would like to learn more about you and the services that you offer, what's the best way to track you down?
Oh, great. Our website is forgewealth.com. You can follow me on Facebook and YouTube at Forge Wealth. And we are now on Instagram, Forge Wealth Management, and then LinkedIn, Regina Hess.
Perfect. Now, I'll make sure to include the links on those in the description of this. So just click on those.
Cool.
Definitely reach out to Regina if you're considering this. I agree. I think the best first person is typically the financial side. You can get them in touch with the right people. Obviously that's just a major factor that comes along with all this, is just kind of nail down the financial piece of it to know that you're comfortable with the outcome and know what your options are. So the earlier you can do that, the better. And then, yeah, obviously we can help get you in touch with all the other parties involved with the team. So this has been a pleasure. I really appreciate you
Thank
taking the
you.
time.
Thanks so much, Adam. This was great. So much fun.
Okay, thanks, Regina.